My name is Brianna Sanders. I'm 28 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in the world. I worked as a junior marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Development Group, earning what most people would consider a modest salary. My colleagues saw me as the quiet girl who brown-bagged lunch, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and lived in what they assumed was a cramped studio apartment. What they didn't know was that the luxury downtown building they often admired during client meetings, I owned it. Every gleaming floor, every marble countertop, every penthouse view, it was all mine, inherited from my late grandmother who'd been far more successful in real estate than anyone in my family ever discussed. The irony wasn't lost on me that my manager, Derek Hamilton, had been making increasingly pointed comments about my limited lifestyle, while literally paying me rent each month through the property management company. Derek was one of those men who believed expensive suits and a leased BMW made him superior to everyone around him. He joined Pinnacle 6 months after me, but quickly climbed the ladder through a combination of charm, connections, and taking credit for other people's work. My work, specifically. The campaigns I developed quietly became Derek's innovative strategies in meetings I wasn't invited to attend. When I tried to speak up, I was told I needed to be more of a team player and less focused on individual recognition. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Derek announced he'd be moving to a new apartment. Finally upgrading from that dump in the suburbs, he said, scrolling through luxury listings on his phone loud enough for the entire office to hear. Unlike some people, I refuse to settle for mediocrity. His eyes found mine across the cubicle partition, and he smirked. Brianna, you should really consider getting a roommate or something. I mean, I know your salary, and frankly, I don't understand how you even afford whatever hovel you're living in. You'll never be able to afford the lifestyle people in our position should have. The comment stung not because it was true, but because of how confidently wrong he was while sitting in my building planning to move into another unit I owned. That afternoon, Derek's girlfriend Madison stopped by the office. She was everything I wasn't, or at least everything I appeared not to be. Blonde, polished, carrying a designer handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She worked in PR for a competing firm, and the two of them made quite the power couple, at least in their own minds. "Oh, Brianna," Madison said when Derek introduced us, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Derek's told me so much about you. It's really admirable how you make the best of your situation. I always tell Derek he should be more grateful for what he has. Not everyone can afford nice things." She gestured around the office as if it were the height of luxury, completely unaware that the building we stood in generated more monthly income than both their salaries combined. Over the following months, Derek's behavior became increasingly intolerable. He started assigning me more menial tasks while taking credit for the strategic work I'd been doing since before he arrived. In team meetings, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence to clarify my points, usually by restating exactly what I just said, but with more confidence. When I suggested cost-effective marketing strategies that had worked well for my property management business, he dismissed them as small thinking and not scalable for serious clients. The most frustrating part was watching him present these same ideas weeks later as his own innovations. My direct supervisor, Jennifer, seemed oblivious to the dynamic, perhaps because Derek had cultivated a reputation as the department's rising star, while I remained deliberately understated about my capabilities and background. The situation reached peak absurdity when Derek announced he'd found his dream apartment in the Meridian Towers, my building. "It's going to cost me a fortune, but image matters in this business," he proclaimed during our Monday morning team meeting. The building has this incredible marble lobby, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the most amazing rooftop terrace. The property management company is pretty exclusive. They only rent to certain types of people, if you know what I mean. He winked at the room. Brianna, you should drive by sometime just to see what success looks like. Maybe it'll motivate you to aim higher. I smiled politely while mentally calculating that his rent would essentially be paying for my next vacation to Italy. The property management company he praised so highly was just me and my accountant, deliberately keeping operations discreet. What made Derek's attitude particularly galling was his complete lack of self-awareness about the source of his perceived success. The Meridian Towers wasn't just any luxury building. It was the crown jewel of downtown real estate, and I'd inherited it along with 4 other properties when my grandmother passed away 3 years ago. Grandma Rose had been a formidable businesswoman who'd started buying real estate in the 1970s when downtown was considered undesirable. She'd renovated buildings, fought zoning battles, and gradually assembled what was now worth over $15 million. She'd also been fiercely private about her wealth, a trait I'd inherited along with her properties. Only my lawyer, my accountant, and my property manager knew the full extent of what I owned. Even my own parents assumed the inheritance had been modest. The perfect setup came when Derek started planning his housewarming party. He'd been living in the Meridian Towers for 2 months and couldn't stop talking about how it proved he was destined for bigger things. "I'm inviting everyone from the office," he announced, "plus some clients and industry contacts. It'll be a great networking opportunity, and honestly, people need to see that Pinnacle employs individuals with taste and ambition." His eyes found mine again. "Brianna, you're welcome to come, but I'll understand if you feel out of place. The building has pretty strict guest policies." Madison chimed in from beside him. "We could always meet you somewhere more casual afterward if you prefer." Their condescension was breathtaking, but I simply smiled and said I'd love to attend. After all, I had keys to every amenity in the building, including the private elevator and the rooftop space Derek was planning to use. The week leading up to the party, Derek's arrogance reached new heights. He started leaving property magazines on my desk with sticky notes marking expensive listings. "Just some inspiration," he'd say with a patronizing smile. "Never hurts to dream big." He also began openly discussing his rent payments, bragging about how much he could afford to spend on housing. "Most people our age are still splitting studio apartments, but I believe in investing in yourself," he declared during a client lunch I'd been excluded from, despite having developed the entire pitch strategy. What he didn't know was that his investment in himself was directly funding my actual investments in commercial real estate across 3 states. Every month, his rent check went straight into an account I use for property acquisitions and renovations. The night of the party arrived, and I chose my outfit carefully: a simple black dress from Target, modest jewelry, and the same worn heels I wore to the office. I wanted to maintain my carefully constructed image right up until the moment of revelation. Derek had gone all out, hiring caterers and a bartender, decorating the apartment with rented furniture and flowers. The space looked stunning because it was stunning. I'd personally overseen every detail of the renovation 2 years ago, from the imported Italian marble to the custom lighting fixtures. Watching Derek accept compliments on his taste while standing in rooms I'd designed was surreal. Madison floated through the party like a hostess, describing the building's amenities as if she'd discovered them herself. "The rooftop garden is just divine," she gushed to a group of clients. "Derek has such an eye for quality." As the evening progressed, Derek grew increasingly pompous, holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "Success isn't just about money," he pontificated to anyone within earshot. It's about positioning yourself correctly, making smart choices about where and how you live. Some people, his gaze flickered toward me, never learn to think beyond their circumstances. Jennifer from HR nodded along, clearly impressed by Derek's apparent sophistication. Several clients mentioned how the luxurious setting made them more confident in Pinnacle's capabilities. Derek basked in the attention, completely unaware that his credibility was built on a foundation that belonged entirely to me. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't ready to end the charade just yet. I wanted the perfect moment when his arrogance was at its peak and the audience was largest. That moment came when Derek decided to give everyone a tour of the building's amenities. "Let me show you what real success looks like," he announced, leading the group toward the elevator. Not everyone gets access to spaces like these. We crowded into the elevator, my private elevator installed at my specific request, as Derek pressed the button for the rooftop terrace. The space was breathtaking at night, with string lights I'd had installed last spring and a view that stretched across the entire city. Derek stood at the railing like a conquering hero, gesturing expansively at the skyline. "This is what happens when you refuse to accept limitations," he declared. "When you understand that your environment shapes your potential." Madison beamed beside him, while several clients took photos against the backdrop of the twinkling city lights. The setting was perfect for what I had planned next. I pulled out my phone and made a call that everyone could hear. "Hi, James, it's Brianna. Yes, I know it's late, but I'm up on the rooftop and there seem to be unauthorized people using the space. No, it's not an emergency, just a tenant who apparently doesn't understand the building policies." Derek's face began to change as my words registered. I continued, "Could you come up with the master access documentation? I think there's some confusion about who has permission to host events up here." The group started murmuring among themselves, but I wasn't done. "Also, bring the lease agreements for Unit 2847. There seems to be some misunderstanding about tenant responsibilities and property ownership." Derek's face had gone completely white, and Madison grabbed his arm with a look of growing panic. Within 10 minutes, James arrived with a folder of documents and a knowing smile. He'd been my property manager for 2 years and understood exactly what was happening. "Good evening, Miss Sanders," he said formally. "I have the ownership documents you requested, as well as Mr. Hamilton's lease agreement." The silence on the rooftop was deafening as he handed me the papers. I opened the first folder and began reading aloud. "Property ownership documentation for the Meridian Towers, Units 1 through 48, penthouse level, and all common areas including rooftop terrace. Owner, Brianna Rose Sanders." Derek's mouth fell open, and I heard someone gasp behind me. But I wasn't finished. I opened Derek's lease agreement and continued. "Lease agreement for Unit 2847. Monthly rent, $4,200. Tenant, Derek Hamilton. Landlord, B.R. Sanders Property Management, LLC." The revelation hit the group like a physical force. Derek's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. This has to be some kind of mistake," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Madison looked between us in horror, finally understanding that everything she'd been bragging about belonged to the woman they'd been condescending to for months. "Brianna, I don't understand," Jennifer said, her voice barely a whisper. "You own this building?" I smiled and nodded toward James, who produced another document. "Ms. Sanders owns 5 commercial properties in the downtown district," he explained professionally. "The Meridian Towers is just one of her investments." Several clients began laughing, not at me, but at Derek, whose arrogance now seemed pathetic rather than impressive. His entire persona had been built on borrowed prestige, and everyone could see it. The confrontation that followed was everything I'd hoped for and more. Derek tried desperately to maintain some dignity, claiming he'd obviously known I owned the building and had chosen to rent from me as a favor. But his earlier comments were too fresh in everyone's memory, his condescension too obvious and recent. Madison fled to the bathroom and didn't return, leaving Derek to face the judgment alone. The clients began asking pointed questions about his actual contributions to the company, now that his lifestyle-based credibility had evaporated. Jennifer looked mortified as she realized how she'd been inadvertently enabling Derek's treatment of me. "Brianna," she said quietly, "I think we need to have a very serious conversation on Monday morning about some workplace dynamics I haven't been paying enough attention to." The power shift was immediate and permanent. By Monday morning, word had spread throughout the office. Derek tried to act normal, but everyone now saw him differently. His expensive suits looked desperate rather than successful. His BMW seemed like obvious overcompensation, and his attempts at authority fell flat when people remembered he was literally paying rent to someone he'd been treating as inferior. The clients from the party had also spread the story through their networks, and Derek's reputation in the industry began to suffer. Within 2 weeks, he'd submitted his resignation, claiming he'd received an unmissable opportunity elsewhere. In reality, his credibility was so damaged that staying would have been professional suicide. Madison, meanwhile, had already moved out of his apartment and blocked his number, apparently deciding that dating someone whose entire image was based on borrowed success wasn't worth the social embarrassment. The aftermath was more satisfying than I'd ever imagined. Jennifer promoted me to Derek's position within a month, acknowledging both my actual contributions to the company and her previous oversight. My colleagues, who'd barely noticed me before, now sought my opinions and treated me with genuine respect rather than polite dismissal. The clients from the party became some of my strongest professional advocates. Impressed not just by my property ownership but by how I'd handled the entire situation with grace and strategic timing. Most surprisingly, several offered partnership opportunities for future real estate ventures, having recognized that my quiet competence was far more valuable than Derek's flashy incompetence. My rental income alone was already more than my salary, but the networking opportunities that emerged from the revelation opened doors I'd never expected. 3 months later, I was closing on my 6th property when I ran into Derek at a coffee shop. He looked tired, older somehow, and was clearly struggling to maintain his previous lifestyle on whatever job he'd managed to find. When he saw me, his expression shifted through several emotions: embarrassment, anger, and finally resignation. "I suppose you're pretty pleased with yourself," he said quietly. I considered several responses, but settled on honesty. "Actually, Derek, I'm not pleased about what happened between us. I'm pleased about what I've built and where I'm going, but I never enjoyed watching someone else struggle." His face softened slightly, and for the first time, he looked genuinely remorseful. "I was an ass," he admitted. "I made assumptions and treated you terribly because I was insecure about my own position. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and sometimes that's enough." Looking back, the whole experience taught me valuable lessons about perception, power, and the importance of timing. I'd spent years hiding my success, partly from habit and partly from a genuine desire to be valued for my work rather than my wealth. But Derek's behavior showed me that staying invisible can sometimes enable others to diminish your contributions and worth. There's a balance between humility and self-advocacy that I'm still learning to navigate. My grandmother had been private about her success because she'd faced discrimination as a woman in business during the 1970s and 80s. But times have changed, and while I don't need to flaunt my wealth, I also don't need to hide my achievements or accept disrespectful treatment from people who mistake quietness for weakness. The Meridian Tower still stands as the crown jewel of my property portfolio, but it means something different to me now. It's not just an inheritance or an investment. It's proof that success comes in many forms and doesn't always announce itself loudly. Derek taught me, inadvertently, that the people worth impressing are those who respect competence over appearances and character over credentials. The clients who became genuine partners after the party were drawn not to the building or the dramatic revelation, but to the way I'd handled a difficult situation with patience and strategic thinking. Those are the professional relationships that have continued to grow and prosper, while the connections Derek made through borrowed prestige proved as superficial as his image. Today, I still drive my Honda Civic sometimes, though I've also bought myself a nice car for special occasions. I still pack lunch most days, though now it's more about preference than necessity. And I still work at Pinnacle, though now as a senior manager overseeing the marketing department Derek once dominated. The difference is that I make these choices from a position of strength rather than constraint. My colleagues know about my real estate investments now, but they also know I earned my promotion through competence and leadership rather than revelation and drama. The balance feels right. Successful enough to command respect, grounded enough to remain relatable, and strategic enough to continue building the empire my grandmother started, and I'm determined to expand.